Hello and welcome to Mr. Clark After Dark, everyone. My name is Lucas Clark and I am a certified educator with Alberta Education and the Alberta Teachers Association. All conversations and interactions exchanged is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. In no way does the content discussed intend to be in violation of the ATA Code of Conduct or meant to target any individual student, teacher, or to belittle or demean the profession in any way. If you have something that you would like me to discuss or have a story of your own to share, please reach out at lucasrdclark97@gmail.com. You can also send a direct message to me on Instagram at Mr. Clark After Dark. Hope you enjoy the show, and please do not forget to subscribe. And now, on to the show. Hope you all enjoy. Hello and welcome back, dear listeners. On today's episode, I have the one and only Tyler Cole. Tyler's partner is also a very good friend of mine, Hillary Morgan, from earlier in the series, if you were listening. Tyler is currently working in economic development in Nova Scotia, Canada. Tyler has also worked in marketing and tourism in the Fort McMurray area over the past 8 years. On this podcast, Tyler and I discuss some of the anomalies of Northern Alberta, the local Astro-Photographer, Jon Tupper, here in town, who works with the Smithsonian, the value and the transferability of post-secondary education, becoming involved in sports tourism, and developing an inner appreciation for what drives things behind the scenes in sports, the impact you have as a teacher, lawn bowling world championships, putting together bid packages to host community events, and much more. Thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show.
It's like a limitless.
Nuts.
I was talking to a dude. Do you know a guy named Jon? What the heck is his last name? He's like an astrophotography guy here in town.
There's an astrophotography guy in Fort McMurray.
His name is Jon. I can't remember what his name is. I wanted to trip with him. Remember I told you we went on that like dark sky trip to Andrew Lake Lodge?
Yes.
Chasing the solar.
So I want to talk about this. So
you just don't want to go on the podcast.
Just move that down. Okay.
So I can tell the story about it later, but like basically this guy.
No, yeah, go into it. Astrophotographer. What is an astrophotographer?
So people who take photos of space. So what the heck is his last name? Like, I wish I remembered.
Jon
Tupper.
Okay.
Jon Tupper. He now like writes a bit for Mix FM radio, like the news side. Yeah. He's just like a sort of stay-at-home dad. Like he used to work at Syncrude. I don't know. He's clearly fucking rich because he has like these telescopes and astrophotography cameras and things where you can take like photos of galaxies.
Okay.
And galaxies. So this dude like came to Andrew Lake Lodge with us on our.
Where is that?
It's northeast of Fort Chip, like in the far northeastern corner of Alberta. Like if this is Alberta, it's like right here. You're 5 kilometers from the NWT, 5 kilometers from Saskatchewan, 100 kilometers north of Fort Chip kind of thing. Yeah. Fly-in only fishing lodge. Like Fort Smith is like 150 kilometers away.
Wow.
Like it's like you're the only humans in any direction. It's amazing. And it's this lodge, this lake. This guy named Dan Wetlaufer owns it. His family's owned it for years. And they built it.
Okay. Family from where, sorry?
They're from Sherwood Park.
No, where did you say the
Andrew Lake Lodge is what it's called.
No, but you said that something with a W. I could be wrong.
And
anyway.
Dan Wetlaufer.
Is
the guy's name. Who owns the lodge.
All right. Yeah.
His dad built it in like the 70s. And then he's always grown up there. They're bush pilots.
Yeah.
This guy's also like buddies with Floyd Mayweather, lives in Vegas. Like amazing dude. And so he owns this fishing lodge and he brings up people from like Texas and whatever. And we're trying to create it as like a signature tourism experience in the region. Yeah. It's like the most, I was see if I can find a photo of it. Like so they have this lodge and we went up.
Is this like a common, I feel like I have lived here my whole life and not once have I heard, I've only really, only recently found out what Fort Smith was. It's pathetic.
It's in the NWT.
Yeah.
That's the lodge. So you can you can fly in
like solid. I'm gonna click on their profile.
It's nice,
solid following too.
Well, we at tourism helped them build it because he's had this lodge forever, and we had gone up there. And this guy, he's like a savvy businessman, runs an airline as well, like a sort of small airline called Reliance Airways, maybe. And he like because you need to have planes to fly into the lodge. He's got float planes. He's got planes on wheels. He's got a small airline base in Fort Smith for doing cargo flights. Because this like they flew in the bulldozer piece by piece to build the runway to build the lodge. Like it's so there's no trail, there's no road, nothing. Right? The lake is like 40 kilometers long, 5 kilometers across, a couple hundred feet deep, one lodge.
One lodge.
Because in Ontario, the rules are if there's like a lake like this, there'd be lodges all over it, but it's a trophy lake, so there's one lodge allowed.
So what's a trophy lake?
It's like they're sort of designated by Alberta Fish and Wildlife. It's for trophy fishing. So only one lodge can be on a specific lake. Like,
so what are they fishing for?
Walleye,
walleye,
trout, fish the size of this table, like crazy ice fishing, you name it. And so, what we were involved in was there's a bunch of these fishing lodges out there that we were working with to sort of, because they have a huge flow already of people who come in from, the U.S. and elsewhere to come do trophy fishing and whatever. Yeah. But we're like, these guys can do Northern Lights.
Yes,
it's in the middle of nowhere. Yes. It's so dark there, man. Yeah. Like it's crazy.
Yeah.
And so we went up there for the Northern Lights thing, like this photo too, right? Like. That's fancy cameras and stuff, but...
But I've even seeing... Honestly, I'm not really much of a late outdoorsman in Fort McMurray.
Yeah.
And I even find, even in town, the light pollution, it definitely does play a role a little bit. Yeah. But I've never seen the Northern Lights like that.
Now, that's probably an hour-long exposure, and you edit it all together, so it loops around. But this back to the Jon Tupper thing. So this guy, he lives in Thickwood, and he came up with us, because he's like this known astrophotography guy, and he knew about the solar eclipse. He's like, here's where to point the camera. He had all these like devices, and he's like, it's gonna come up over that hill over there. Like it was all this, right? And so and he's this amazing dude. He like put his telescope on this like rocky outcrop, and he's like taking photos through the telescope. And I ran into an event last week, and I was like, "Oh, hey, how's it going, man? Like, I haven't seen you in a while. Like, how's things?" He's the guy who does all the Christmas lights. You know at Fort City Church, they do all the crazy Christmas lights?
Okay.
He's that guy. He does that too. Where you like tune it up with the radio. So that's him.
See?
And so he was like, "Oh yeah, I just bought this new telescope." And he wouldn't tell me what it cost, but I could only imagine it's like 25 grand. So, like, dude, you could buy a RAV4 or you could buy a telescope.
Or a telescope, but he has dedication to astrophotography.
So,
how... Okay. No, that was... Okay, it's another lot. I find... If anything, for Northern Alberta lodges, you are definitely my go-to person for this.
Because I get to go, man. Like, this thing is like, a lot of people don't get to go. Yeah, these are his photos. He takes these mostly in his backyard in Thickwood.
Jon Tupper.
Yeah, and he's like, like, he's got all these fancy... I was asking the guy some question about light pollution. Yeah. He's got the Hubble telescope in his backyard. And so I was like, the thing I was asking him about, I was like, exactly the same question about light pollution.
Yeah.
I was like, so is this a problem?
Yeah.
You live in the middle of town. He's like, no, if you get the right filters and the right way you set up your camera, all these fancy devices would probably cost $1 million.
Yes.
You can set your camera up so it doesn't be affected by it. He's like, there's a dude in Tokyo who takes some of the best astrophotography from his condo in Tokyo. And I was like, well, okay.
I find that such a wild rabbit hole to get down, but then to like invest in and say, I'm going to be that person. Yeah. I'm going to be the Western Tokyo version of taking the best astrophotography.
And he like knows all these people. When we did the solar eclipse thing, he's like, I know all these people from like Astro magazines and like the Smithsonian, and I'm going to talk to them and like all this. And I was like, man, who is this guy? Like what?
Well, and I find that kind of clashes with the traditional image of like the Fort McMurray person of just like no creativity, just make money, just like buy big things. Yeah. But I mean, obviously you needed to buy big things for that.
Some people buy a fifth wheel. Yeah. Other people buy an astrophotography telescope, man. Like that's just the way it is.
So what was your kind of path to being in tourism? Because one of the big things that I wanted to talk to you about to start off was there's very much a reluctance to acknowledge that post-secondary education really has much value in Fort McMurray. I would say it's usually like engineering or medicine like that. Those are obviously seen as being of value to most of the students here. So we did a very similar kind of undergrad route, right? So what did you end up studying?
I have a history degree from the University of British Columbia.
So you did history?
Yeah.
And that was 4 years?
4 years.
And then so you ended up doing a tourism focused?
So no, I have a sports business degree. After I graduated from my history degree, I went for like a lot of people who have an arts degree. I'm sure you are the same boat. You're like, what do I do?
Yes,
with my life?
But it's usually the narrative is what do I do now? They never work. But obviously, you find a lane to go down eventually.
Yeah, right? Because I don't get to answer your question of what my specific path was, but I think this is exactly the sort of thing about arts degrees, right? Is it's about not so much what you learn. Like you and I could start a history podcast here about the Russian Revolution because we have history degrees. Yeah. But you could also figure out that you have skills for reading and writing.
Yeah.
Communications, analysis. You can digest large volumes of information and then process them into certain thoughts or written aspects, whatever that might be.
Like
right. So
being concise and
totally. Those are it's the sort of the soft skills you learn, whether you study history, political science, sociology, psychology. It's all the same thing.
Soft skills? Is like, do we just touch on it? Because I almost find I find it hard to relay to the students the value of those soft skills because they don't see it as like, this is stupid, I don't want to be here. Right. And I'm always trying to be like, no, like there is an inherent value. Yeah. You don't see it because I find it compounds. Right. But they don't see that at the start. Right. Yeah. So would you agree with that? Like,
I think it is. I think because like I said, those skills that you learn of like, you're writing a history paper and you've got to go into the library and sit in the basement. Because a lot of our essays we're writing, you can't just find articles online on JSTOR. You got to go in the basement of the library and pull out a bunch of books. And so you're combing through these books and you're flagging things and you're pulling passages and you're transcribing things and you're trying to find a thread of what it is to organize your own thoughts.
Yeah. You're creating a new piece, no matter like what you do in any sort of arts degree, even if you're pulling from things 12 other people said, you're the first person to pull those 12 things together. Yeah. So it might still not be very good, but you're still kind of learning what it is to produce something original.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's that ability to process information is why I think a lot of people who go from having an arts degree go on to become lawyers. Yeah. Because it's the same skill set of like, I've got to sort through this case file that's, 4 inches thick. And I got to figure out what the common thread is through all this and distill that information into a succinct point.
Well, and so that's why I've always like secretly admired your kind of pathway too, because I've always said an arts degree to the students I said is for either being a lawyer, a teacher, or unemployed. But I think I should stop saying that because
I would say you should stop saying that because and trust me, let's be honest.
But I'm buying into that joke, right?
Of course. Yeah. And we were all in undergrad in the same boat. You had your friends who were in engineering of good luck with that. Oh, really? Art history? Good for you. Like good luck with that, right? But I think if you can figure out what the sort of core threads of the skills you can apply to different things. So after I graduated from my history degree, I went on to Algonquin College in Ottawa, and they had a 1-year, they called it a graduate certificate program in sport business management. Mm-hmm.
So what was the decision to go into sport business management? So why did that come up? Where did that go?
I love the business of sports. Yeah. So I've always been a sports fan. You can't say this is an audio podcast, but I'm wearing a Leafs hat at the moment. Like I love sports. I'm from Ontario. I've always loved the Leafs and the Blue Jays and various other things. But as I sort of grew in my sports fandom of things, I became much more interested in the business side of what was going on behind the scenes. Yeah. I give a lot of credit to, there's a famous sports radio host. He recently had a stroke and he's on the recovery path called Bob McCowan. And he hosted a show called Primetime Sports on the Fan 590 radio station in Toronto for 30 years more. Yeah. And he, he'd talk about the Leaf game last night or will the Blue Jays win the World Series or what's happening with the Raptors. But he would also have a real bent about the business side of sports that drives what's actually going on behind the scenes. Okay. Right. So he would have on agents, he'd have on team owners, he'd have on sort of movers and shakers in the sports world that were operating behind the scenes. The guys who put the deal together to build the Air Canada Centre.
You think these things just happen? Yeah. Like you don't. You assume they're so simple because you don't see them. Right. And I think it's like, oh, it's just another NHL season, another NHL game. Yeah. But you don't actually see the insane body of work.
It's a business behind the scenes. Yeah. Right? Like it's about how much money can you make selling tickets? How many jerseys can you sell? Who's watching on TV? Yeah. How can you afford to, why does the salary cap in the NHL go up or down? It's because how much money does the league make in an average year that then drives how much the owners can spend on the salary cap. Yeah. Right? So the way he would always look at things, I listened to his show on podcast or on the radio every day for a long time when I first started listening to podcasts. Yeah. It was one of the first shows that I found that was really interesting because it was about, the sports. It was different.
You're not just hearing players talk about playing. Right. It's here's how we actually make more money doing this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so the business side of sports was really interesting to me of how it all works kind of behind the scenes. And so I was trying to figure out what my path might be. We can talk later on about teaching. Like my dad's a teacher. Okay. I'm, engaged to a teacher at this school as well. So I'm very familiar with that world, but I was like, I don't know. Some people talked me out of it. So,
okay. So who talked you out of it and why?
My dad, mostly. My dad, he taught grade 4 and grade 7 in Ontario for 35 years. Okay. And was a great teacher, most patient man I've ever met, amazing coach, all that stuff.
Great golfer.
And he was amazing golfer, all the things. But it's like, you know what? You need to, he's like, the way teaching is sort of going, and he retired 5 years ago, maybe. Mm-hmm. And he was like, the way teaching is going, it's changing. It's very different from when I started in 1980, whatever it was. And that's okay. There's reasons we need to change that industry clearly in education.
Yeah.
But he's like, if you don't love it, it's going to be a grind.
Yeah.
And I was like, he's like, if you're not like feeling like this is your passion in life to be a teacher and be an educator, just because you think you might be good at it doesn't mean that that's the path you should take, because it is a job that requires all of you to be good at and to actually perform, because it's, every day, the marking, the prep, the administration, all the things, like it's such a hard, it is a hard job. And so if you're not willing to be all of yourself in it, maybe don't do it.
Yeah.
And so, again, I love teachers. They're my favorite people in the world. No, I'm serious. I'm not even saying that comes in with you, Clark. Like, I love teachers. They're my favorite people in the world. I love spending time with them.
Like, what is it about teachers just in general that you're like, I dig this?
I love the way that they approach things. Okay. It's a way that you have to sort of, all the different ways that you have to approach the same thing to get through to 35 different people in the same room. You can't, because you and I could sit here and you and I may think about the same thing or come to the same conclusion when you read something or work through a problem. But the kid in the back corner, they might not, they might not see it that way because you've got a room full of people. Again, go back to the university thing.
You're continually recalibrating everything you're saying as you're talking.
Because if you're, if you're a university class full of engineers, they're all going to approach problems in the same way. That's why they're in an engineering degree. Or if you're in a sociology class, they're all going to approach it in the same way. Or similarly enough.
They have a similar lens that they come into it with.
Because they've all kind of tracked in that way. But if you've got a class full of grade 10 students, some of them might be engineers in the future. Some of them might be doctors. Some of them might be truck drivers. Some of them might be podcast hosts. Like, you just don't know what they're going to do with their. So because of, and not to mention in a community like this one with diversity of where people come from, the backgrounds that they have in terms of education, what their parents have done with their education, languages they speak, that sort of thing. You have no idea how these kids are coming in, showing up to class every day. And so because of that, the teacher has to figure out, how do I get through to these people?
It's like, now I'm going to teach you about the French Revolution.
And like and as a teacher sitting there saying, I tried this yesterday. We're in this 3-day, program about whatever the topic is. Yesterday I tried it this way and it wasn't landing. Or even on the fly. I did the first 10 minutes in this one strategy and it didn't happen. And okay, how can I recalibrate on the fly for what to do? That's so hard.
On the fly calibration is no joke.
And I think that's so hard. Like, in my world, if you're in a meeting and you're like trying to talk about something or trying to get a point across and it doesn't get across, like, you're like, okay, you can try. That's not to say you don't try or like recalibrate or try and mix it around. But like, if it doesn't land, you can say, hey, like, you can follow up with an email and say, hey, like, did you get what I was saying? Do you want to give me a phone call to follow up? I think in education, you get one chance to explain the thing.
Yeah, because then you can always be like, hey, I'll sleep on this tonight, call you again tomorrow, and we'll try and figure out like a follow-up, like dialogue on that. So you make the decision, don't go into teaching. It's changing. And I assume that's been the weird part for me, because I know obviously your fiance's been in it about 7 years now. And so I'm in like kind of year 4, but like technically year 2, because I was able to sub for a couple of years. It's all I know. In terms of the people are like, oh, it's the constant emailing, but I was also constantly emailing in university. And like in high school, I had all my email and in social media. And so I don't really, I guess it really hasn't struck me as like, it is a lot of work, but in terms of how it used to be, I just don't have like a reflection on that. So I hear a lot of people who are continually kind of burning out because of that. So maybe that's a good call to not go into teaching. I don't really know yet. It's still pretty fun for me. So I don't really have a.
And look, this is why I think, teachers, if it's something that you're good at, like it's, the world needs more teachers, clearly.
And we're getting short pretty much everywhere now. And so like we have less and less people literally with the exact same kind of thought process you had of like, oh, it's changing if you're not completely all in it. And it's hard to go into something, because I think maybe a lot of people go into teaching because maybe I'll end up finding it rewarding once I'm there. So you do your degree and then you get into it. But if you discover pretty early on, it's like, and maybe that's even another part that I kind of liked your kind of lane, is because if you ever did go into teaching, the lane that you ended up going down is something you could also kind of pursue on the outside, right?
I think so. I think one of the things about teaching, and I was talking with someone about this recently, is that so both of my parents worked in very similar jobs for more than 35 years. My mom started at one company when she was in university and as a summer student, and then got hired on there full time and then worked there for her entire career. Different roles within the same company, but worked for the same company for her entire career. Dad worked at 2 different schools. And then, dad worked at 2 different schools. And then but taught mostly grade 4, bit of grade 7, and then did a bit of a stint as sort of a, acting admin for a while. But this idea of you work in a career for your whole career. You start when you're 22 and you retire from the same place when you're 65.
Yeah,
like that world
terrifying
doesn't exist anymore.
No. Yeah.
Right? That world no longer exists, and you could look at is that good or is that bad? But I think teaching is the one place where it's a little bit like that. Yes, you might go from different schools, but there's a lot of teachers who, teach their entire career. They work at different schools. Maybe they start as a teacher. Maybe they admin for a bit. Maybe they go to the board office, but they work
a coordinator of something.
But they work in the same field for the bulk of their career. And I think the reason I'm thinking about this is like teaching, it's one of these things where because it is a sort of specialized track, and if you are a real sort of passionate believer in it and you love it, I think a lot of people will stay in it because they're like, this is what I'm good at. This is what I love. I love the kids. I love the impact I can make on them. I love the fact that, there's a reason why teachers are on the list of people that you can sign your passport application, right? Because it's one of these trusted community things. Like, dentists and doctors and lawyers are on there, but teachers are too, because they're a trusted member and important member of the community. There's a reason marketing professionals aren't on the, on the list, right? Because like it's different. We don't have the same, it's not one of these professions that is so highly respected.
Thing?
Maybe, but I think it's just the respect that comes with it. Like everyone remembers, everyone remembers Miss Westendorp in grade 5 because she made an impact on them.
Yeah.
Like I don't think everyone has that with other careers. You don't say, wow, I worked with that Tyler guy and man, we did this project together and he really made such an impact on me. Like, yes, you have role models and you have mentors in your life, but because of the way that teachers work with young people at such an impressionable age, whether it's little kids or even in high school. Hey, I was in Mr. Clark's history class and he taught me that I was really good at I was really good at social studies and I had a passion for this stuff and the way I think it was really good. So I decided to go and study that in university.
Yeah, that's
like that happens for sure. We all know that happens. Every teacher's got a story like that where a kid came through their class and they inspired them in a way to go on to greater things in their field. Miss Morgan has that. Yeah, Miss, you told me that I could write. Miss, you believed in me, and now I'm going to journalism school because you told me I was good at this.
Yeah, and that I find that's the coolest part.
Absolutely.
For sure. And usually the thing I've noticed, it's only happened for me like a few times, or like even a couple times. But when it happens, it's from the kids you least expect it from. Yeah. And sometimes it's not like, sometimes maybe you have the kid that you're helping every day and they're coming to talk to you. And then maybe they kind of like, oh, like maybe I'm actually going to pursue this myself. I'm like, oh, like that's awesome. And then I've had notes given to me from kids who I just didn't think that I was like connecting with at all. Yeah. And I just like completely take a 180 and like I'll read this note and it can get pretty emotional. And it is pretty cool, I would say. But yeah. So you go into sports business, finish that degree, and then how do you end up in tourism
in Fort McMurray?
Yeah. So you're at Algonquin College in Ottawa. So you go from UBC to Ottawa to
Fort McMurray. So in our sport business program, we had classes on, it was sort of a co-op heavy program where you'd have class 3 days a week and then co-op 2 days a week.
So what is the co-op?
So people had placements with different organizations. So in my co-ops, I worked for Ottawa Sports Entertainment Group, who own the Ottawa 67s in the OHL. They own the Ottawa Red Blacks in the CFL, and they operate TD Place Stadium in Ottawa on Bank Street. And so I worked for them for a little bit doing some operations kind of stuff because I'd worked in game day operations in UBC as a sort of a university job. Some friends of mine worked for the varsity athletics team. So we put on all the sporting events.
So what do you mean by put on the event?
So we would be the operations team. So we would help with field setup. We would do ticketing. We would do, helping with, for hockey games, you'd be the goal judge, timekeeper, different things like that. So you'd work within the varsity athletics department doing various aspects of events. And that's how I sort of fell in love with events. Because one of the reasons I got into this world is because there's nothing more exciting to me than a big event.
Well, it's literally eventful. Like that's literally.
Like I grew up in a house where we'd buy a new TV every Winter Olympics because mom loves the Olympics so much. Like my mom is like the world's biggest Olympics fan. Like she will watch like the 2-man luge at 3:00 in the morning because she loves the Olympics.
What?
There's something about the way that the countries come together and the sort of power of sport and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. So I like that. I grew up in a house where that was the most important thing, was we loved events and sports. Okay. And so, and then I sort of went on to work.
There is a different feeling. Yeah. Because even when you have even like smaller scale events, but it's like cities or provinces.
Absolutely.
It's a different energy.
Yeah. It is.
Yeah.
And so I started with that game day operations thing. And then when I was at Algonquin, we were looking for placements, and I was like, I've got some experience doing that sort of stuff. And so I did a little bit of that with Ottawa Sports Entertainment Group. I also did, I had another placement with the Bowls Canada, the Canadian Lawn Bowling Association. Doing various things because see you laugh,
Canadian lawn bowling. I didn't even know.
So because every sport has a national sports organization and provincial associations under that, which govern the sport in each jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm laughing.
They set the rules. They host competitions, that sort of thing. So I worked in their office because it was in 2017. So it was during for Canada 150 participation. Had like a Canada 150 sort of celebration where they picked 150 sports and activities and had like a list of things they wanted people to do and tick off this like super list. And lawn bowling made the list. So we were trying to roll out to all the lawn bowling clubs. Like, here's how you can use this. Okay. Do community try it out days. Because see, you laugh because lawn bowling is funny, but like a guy who worked in our office was like a Canadian junior lawn bowling champion. He'd like go to Australia 3 times a year to go lawn bowling.
And that's what I find. It's the opportunities you don't like. If you never pursue anything different, you'll never realize like, oh, I can actually travel around the world lawn bowling.
Absolutely.
Like, that's like
100%. Absolutely. So I did that for a bit. And then I also had a placement with the Ottawa South United soccer club. In Ontario, they have a sort of amateur semi-pro soccer league called League One Ontario for kind of like junior hockey for soccer, basically. Okay. And so I was the public address announcer for their soccer games.
So like a commentator?
Goal scored by number 6, Lucas Clark. 37th minute.
What?
Yeah. Okay. So I was the public address announcer for their games for a little bit of that. And then, but one of the classes that we had, so we had classes on sports finance, marketing, operations kind of stuff.
So what did you, again, like I don't have to go too nitty gritty into like the actual like book work, but what is that book work like? Because I just think I just hear the word sport finance and I just, then my mind has that first wall. Like, I don't know what's beyond that.
It was sort of sports finance and economics. So you'd look at kind of how, how is the salary cap calculated in the NHL? Like, what are they looking in terms of revenues? Where do the revenue sources come from in the sports leagues?
What have they done to enhance revenue in certain areas? Is that like a
little bit of that, and also like where budgets come from? Like, you'd sort of look at sample, because our instructors in the program were a bit of a mixed bag of people who come in. So we had some people who were like sort of staff professors or instructors, I guess it's college, from the college. So one of the people from the finance department would come in and teach our finance classes. But we had a guy from what was then called the Canadian Sport Tourism Alliance, is now called Sport Tourism Canada, who was our instructor for our sport tourism class, which we'll talk about more in a minute. We had other people from, I think we had a guest lecturer from the Ottawa Senators who talked about marketing. Okay. Well, here's how we do marketing with the Ottawa Senators. Like, it was that sort of thing.
So I guess my question would be, because students will say like, oh, Mr. Clark, I want to study business.
Yes.
Well, and I've asked them like, well, what is that?
Yes.
Like, what do you actually, and so I think the point of it is almost like an elevated finance focused arts degree. That's kind of the gist of what I
think that some degree, this program was not your average, like,
like
business program at a university. But I think in a business, and if you study quote business, you can do lots of things. You can get a marketing degree, which is business.
It seems more focused what you did, which I kind of
It was sports related. It was a lot of the same stuff you do in any kind of other business program. Lesser because it was a shorter time period. It's not a 4-year undergrad commerce degree. But like, you learn a bit about marketing. You learn about organizational behavior. You'd learn about finance. You'd learn about
so what is organizational behavior?
I think it's kind of like business psychology.
Okay.
Like how you sort of set up a business in terms of how do you put people in the right positions to figure out how they can kind of maximize what they do within your organization. So, like that. But we had the biggest one that really resonated with me clearly was we had a sport tourism class. And so we had a professor named Stephen Trainer who worked for,
what a name for a professor.
And so he came in and he worked for the Sport Tourism Alliance, who is this sort of national level organization for all of the offices that do sport tourism in Canada. Now, usually that's embedded within a economic development agency, a tourism office, a municipality, sometimes within a venue. Sometimes some communities that have a big venue, like a Mac Island, for example, will have someone who works within the venue to be their chief organizer and booker of events. So they host summits and conferences throughout the course of the year that bring together the destinations along with the sports organizations, the rights holders and the hosts, basically. So you would so he would talk about how this industry works and the business behind it. It's a multi-billion-dollar a year industry in Canada, sport hosting.
Sport hosting.
That's everything from, 3A volleyball zones at McTavish to the Canada, to the World Cup.
Long hierarchy.
It's everything.
Does it all go, so is there like a national organization that kind of bleeds into every town?
Yeah, so the Sport Tourism Alliance, they are sort of an industry association for...
Is it almost like the bar for lawyers? It's like
it's
something
not
you gotta like...
formal.
No, but it's like an association with pretty much wherever you are as a practicing sports host. That's who you would refer to.
Yeah, it was more, they were sort of knowledge keepers because they would compile a list of, they put this like booklet together. Every year they have a conference in the spring. That's sort of the event. It's called Sport Events Congress. And so you'd go to this conference and you'd meet with all the different sports associations and say, hey, Baseball Canada, like there's been huge success in this community in the past sort of 6-7 years with Baseball Canada. They've hosted amazing baseball national championships the past few years, which is a partnership between the Regional Recreation Corporation at Mac Island and Baseball Canada and the Minor Baseball Association, the Fort McMurray Oil Giants. And so that partnership came about of conversations at these events.
I'm getting a lot of association communication.
It is because it's all, a lot of these associations this is all mostly public sector stuff, right? Yeah. You're dealing with publicly funded sports associations that, Baseball Canada, for example, their budget is made up of, they get some sponsorship in certain things, but it's mostly about your registration fees that you pay as a minor baseball player go into Baseball Alberta for your insurance and other things because they all govern that stuff. Yep. And then up from that, these provincial associations then pay into the national associations, which oversee training and development courses for, national teams. They do coaching stuff as well. Some of that goes through the national coaching program, what's it called? Coaching Association of Canada. But a lot of that goes into specific sports that trickles down. But these sports are also the rights holders of their own events. So all the national championships that get hosted, Baseball Canada has the rights to doing, 5 or 6, maybe more every year, national championships. Okay. They've got a U13, a U14, a girls U15, whatever it is, right? So they have all these events that they are the rights holders to, and they have people who work in their organizations to find where they're going to host them. So they work with people like what I used to do, and there's a team of folks doing it here in the community still, that they go and you talk to these people. And so I talked to Lucas Clark, who is the events coordinator for Golf Canada. And he'd say, hey, we're looking to host some golf events here in town. And you'd say, well, here's the events we've got available in these years. We're looking for a host for the senior women's open. We're looking for a host for the junior, for this junior event. We're looking for a Western Canada.
So when you're looking for a host, like you'd look for like a Mac Island or like
you're looking for
a venue?
It depends what it is. Some events you're looking for a golf course. Okay, some events you're looking for a community. Some events you're looking for a partnership between multiple communities. And in this book that Sport Tourism Canada compiles,
so like the World Juniors, it was like Moncton and Halifax.
Yeah, so they know. So that's a Hockey Canada. Oh, sorry, it's a double IHF property, but so they own the event. But Hockey Canada's got a special agreement with them to host it every 2 or 3 years. Okay, so Hockey Canada then looks for communities to bid for that event. And you put together a bid package that says, we here in Kelowna.
So have you ever had to do a bid package?
Lots.
Okay, so what goes into a bid package?
Lots of things. So in your bid packages, you're putting community information. So Fort McMurray has a population of 75,000 people. We have an international airport with flights to this, and this, with this kind of frequency. Here's a map of where everything is. Let's say you're bidding for a ringette event. Yep. So in the technical specs for the event, it'll have how many arenas do you need? How big do the arenas have to be? How many dressing rooms do you have to have? How big do the dressing rooms need to be? What other space do you need to have in the space for event operations, officials, hospitality, that sort of thing?
Sounds fun.
How many hotels do you have? How big are the hotels? What rates can you get? What's your local transportation?
800 rooms.
All that stuff. Yeah. So we at tourism would have all of the relationships with all the hotels and all the venues. And we had this like master book of all the specs of everything. So we knew how many rooms were in each hotel. We knew how many seats does Casbin Center have, or Center Fireplace? How many seats are in the ballpark at Mac Island? What is the foot candle of the lighting in the Arena 2 at Mac Island? Because for certain sports, you need to know certain things. Some sports are like, hey, how big's your arena? Yeah. But for badminton, for example, we did a bunch of work with Badminton Canada to do some events here. We were supposed to have, right when the pandemic hit, there was supposed to be a international Olympic qualifier for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics with Badminton Canada.
What?
I don't think that's a secret.
No.
And so it was supposed to be this big event, like a 2-week-long event hosted between Badminton Canada, Badminton Alberta, and the local Badminton Association at Mac Island, where we would have all these international from Pan Am. It was a Pan Am qualifier. So people from all over North and South America would come here to get their last bit of, because so badminton's like tennis, it's all about the points you earn at the events you're at. The bigger events have more points, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So you would go into these events. And so this event was going to be one of the last qualifiers for the Tokyo Olympics in 2020. Okay. They're supposed to be in July of 2020. So for badminton, for example, the reason I bring this up is badminton is very technically specific. Like for when you're in your bid manual, what you need to have, it would say your lights have to be of this type. You have to have this much space behind the thing. It's got to be this. The ceiling's got to be a minimum of this height. Like it's very technically specific for what you have to have in your venue. Yeah. Other sports are like, oh, do you have a basketball court?
Yeah.
Like it's not, some sports are not as, there's always a little bit of technical specs, depending on what level you're looking to host. The higher level, the more technical it has to be, clearly. The running track has to be of a certain type. The safety space has to be this. It's got to be grass, not turf. You see this with FIFA, right? The FIFA men's games can't be played on turf.
Yes.
Has to be on grass, this kind of thing. But if you're hosting the U14 Alberta Soccer Championships, they're like, how many fields do you have? Okay. Is there a bathroom?
That makes sense. Is there?
Like it's not, is there a snack bar? Like they're
Are
not
they gonna
as
sell
specific.
Kit Kat bars?
Totally. Right. It's not as specific. So these are things that we would deal with all the time is you're putting these bid packages together and when you're figuring out what to bid for, you're analyzing what opportunities are a good fit. Yeah. Right. Your community, we just don't have enough hockey rinks to do that kind of event.
Yes.
We don't have enough this. We don't even have a velodrome. So we're not going to bid for a cycling event.
Yes, that makes sense.
But other times, so once you figure that part out, then you're like, okay, do we have enough hotel rooms? Do you have enough? Are we the right kind of community for this? Is our climate going to work? Do we even have you talk to the venues and say, hey, we're looking to do this event at this time of year? Like, oh, sure, the trade show's on. We can't do it right then.
Yep.
So you'd kind of work through these kind of things to figure out what was a good fit. And then you put your bid package together. Usually came out of our office, but we work extensively with, you'd ask the hotels for a quote. And then they come back. You talk to the venues about availability, quotes, pricing, that kind of thing. You'd usually talk to the local association. So you talk to, I wouldn't go and bid for the Alberta Soccer Championships without talking to the soccer club.
Yes.
Because usually the soccer club would say, hey, we want to host.
You're going through local. Yeah. Because
this is how I met Peter Pereno.
Who?
Peter Pereno.
Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah,
because he was working with, same thing for the Alberta ASAA, the Alberta School Athletic Association. Same thing for high school sports. So we hosted in 2018 the Alberta Bowl and the high school football championships because a bunch of the high schools here, Brendan Toner and some other people were really keen to see high school football come back. So we hosted that event here because now you got to bid for those through the schools, but we helped them on that a little bit to bid for those events and say, here's what our stadium looks like. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's how it's going to work. And so I met Pereno that way because he was working on some things here at McTavish for some hosting things and said, hey, I heard that you guys can help me with bid packages and various other things. Yeah. So
I feel like he's doing that kind of on the micro level. Yeah. Some of I'm sure he might still do it through the city. I don't really know, but I know his AD job is extremely intense.
It is.
With the load that he has to deal with all the time. And people kind of think of again, kind of going back to you see the NHL games going on, you just assume, oh, that just happens. Like it's very fluid. Everyone knows where they should be, but it's actually, there needs to be someone putting everyone somewhere in the right spot to make it happen.
And there's a whole world behind the scenes. And this is why, so when I was hired into that role in 2017, so I was looking for a sport tourism job when I was in school because I'd be taking these classes and I was like, this is exactly what I love. This is amazing. Like I love the idea of, because anybody who's a sport tourist, is if you travel to a different location, more than I think it's like 50 kilometers from where you live, for the express purpose of attending or competing in a sporting event, you're then considered a sport tourist. And your dollars that you spend, hotels you stay in, food you eat, shopping you do, whatever, is all part of your economic impact that's spent in the community. So that's the whole bottom line of all of this is about that.
Yes.
That's why you do events like this.
Is there a net positive economic impact?
And it's a bit about community pride and the marketing you can do around that. But the core of it, when you put a pitch together to city council to say, hey, you should invest in this event, it's because, well, we think the economic impact is going to be X.
Because you're asking for public dollars.
Oftentimes, yes. Sometimes you don't need to. Sometimes, but oftentimes, yes, there was public funding, and the municipality here has amazing grant programs for sport hosting. Okay. So you'd work extensively with those folks at the municipality as well on the funding side to say, look, we're doing this event. It's going to need $35,000 to pay for the facility costs. Yep. And then the rest of it will be made back through hotels and everything else. So it's based often on those things. So I was looking for one of these jobs because it's like, this is what an interesting industry.
Yes.
Like, it's such a cool
This is
world.
something I
And-
never would have thought about
But
pursuing.
all the times you went into a hockey tournament when you were a kid,
Yeah.
right in Bonnyville,
Yeah.
you're a sport tourist.
Yes.
Because you're staying in a hotel and you're driving down and you're going
Every
to Boston
time we
Pizza.
go to any event with the school.
Yeah.
You're a sport.
You're a sport tourist. You're
Yeah.
spending dollars in that local community.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't have gone to Three Hills if you weren't going to the volleyball tournament. Right? I'm sure it's very nice there. But you know what I mean? Like, that's the thing, right? Like, that's what it's about.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
I was looking for one of these opportunities and something popped up in Fort McMurray.
Okay.
And
so how did you manage to even find it?
there is a sports job. Anyone who's out there is looking for sports jobs. There's a thing called circ.ca, SIRC.ca. It's a sports industry job board, basically. It's like Indeed for sports people. And so they have everything on there. Yeah.
Hey everyone, thank you all for tuning in. Really do appreciate it. Just wanted to say again, if there are any issues with professional conduct and or you would like to share your own story, experience, or have something you would like to contribute to the show, please do not hesitate to reach out at lucasrdclark97@gmail.com or send a direct message on Instagram to @MrClarkAfterDark. Hope you all enjoyed, potentially found something of use, and of course, please do not forget to subscribe. See you guys all next time. Unless you're scared.